Welcome to this much maligned post-lunch session. Generally, people think it a nice time to have a nap. There is something soporific about it, but I am very optimistic because I know that I will be helped by the Bagh Bahadurs who are sitting in the front row. And I use this in a gender-neutral sense, that they will bring all of you back to a kind of, engagement that any discussion on the tiger demands. Because this has been a process of continuous engagement with the tigers. So let's continue. And I begin by inviting Shrito Khatua, the Tiger Man and the Man-Tiger binary, reading the pure trace in Buddhadev Dasgupta's Bagh Bahadur. So, will you please introduce yourself first before the presentation?
Yeah, thank you, sir. I'm Shrito Khatua. I'm a postgraduate second year student at the University of Calcutta, English department. I have a presentation, so.
আরেকটা আছে না ল্যাপটপ, ওটা ইউজ করো।
आगे सेशन में बात बोलो तो लैपटॉप এসে গেছে
My paper is titled The Tiger Man and the Man-Tiger Binary, Reading the Pure Trace in Buddhadev Dasgupta's Bag Bahadur. I want to begin with a sort of a detour and talk about what is called in conservation studies as anthropomorphism. It is basically nothing new. It is the attribution of human characteristics to non-human entities. For example, imagining or reimagining the tiger or any other sort of animal for conservation purposes with the help of human values. For example, look at these posters. Don't let this be my last selfie. Or perhaps something like this. Or this one. But the crux of the matter in anthropomorphism is the definition of what is the anthropos, what is the human, right? What, after all, is the human? An interesting answer to this could be what, in an article called Are You Man Enough, Big and Bad Enough? Ecofeminism and Wolf Eradication in the USA, the geographer Jordi Emmel has to say. He says, the human is that which is not the animal. He says, how are oppressions linked? Various kinds of oppressions, for example, the colony, the woman, the gay, the animal, the black. How are the oppressions linked? They are linked to the multiple processes of identity and hierarchy creation, bolstered by the dualisms of human-animal, civilization, wilderness, etc. So what it means to be human can never be determined without the animal other. For those of you who are familiar with post-structuralism would know that this is very similar to what Derrida points out in Saussures' critique of language. These are minimal pairs, binaries. For example, Saussure would say, language consists of a series of differences without positive terms. So a cat is a cat because it is not hat or mat. Day is day because it is not night. In the same way, human is human because human is not animal. Derrida's addition to this would be that, so in order to define the human, we must take into account the difference that it has with the animal. In other words, human essentially would be traced by the animal. This trace is what constitutes the human. Human defined by the originary or the pure trace of the animal, and the other way around, the animal defined by the pure trace of the human. Derrida says, each sign carries within it an originary, pure trace of other signs. Very simple. I'm going to read this in Buddhadev Dasgupta's film, Bag Bahadur, which came out in 1989, traveled to various places in the world, quite well known, well archived. The film is the simple tale of a village artist called Ghunuram. For most parts of the year, Ghunuram is a vagrant laborer. He works at the quarry, breaking stones. He works at the railway platform, carrying goods. He's a coolie. He is a laborer, often the butt of all insults, all jokes, except for that 1 month when he visits his village, Nonpura, during the festival time when he is the tiger man. He dresses up as the tiger and dances, which is the spectacle, it's the center of all attraction during the festival. There is in his personality, what I pointed out earlier, a sort of liminal trance fusion between the human and the animal, Ghunuram, the person, and Ghunuram, the tiger. If you'll allow me, I want to show just one little excerpt from the film to point this out, if I can. Yeah. ঠিক আছে দুটো করে ঠিক আছে থাক আমি if it opens in time. Yeah. Please notice the juxtaposition of, so for example, the rain and the fire, Ghunuram the person and Ghunuram the tiger. And then you have the fire. This is Gunuram, the man, the laborer. And in a long track shot, the camera travels to Gunuram, the tiger. And we're back. But the central crisis in the film begins when there's this circus troupe that comes from the small town, Patna, to display their skills, to do a little business at festival time. And they have in their retinue a live leopard, bug, a real bug. So there comes this conflict between Ghunura, the made-up bug, the nakli bug, and the circus, which has a real, actual tiger. Leopard, but they call it the bug. This makes Gunuram aware of himself as a human artist, and he begins demanding those anthropomorphic values of izzat and pyar and bahaduri. What he does, therefore, is he enters the cage of the tiger to fight it out with the animal, to prove that he is still capable as a human being to protect his values, his integrity. And the film ends with the tiger killing Gunuram. I want to take this as an allegory of what Derrida has to say about the inevitability of the trace. Like Gunuram cannot exist as only a human without the pure trace of the tiger. Derrida says without difference as temporalization, without the non-presence of the other inscribed within the sense of the presence, nothing could be said to have meaning or value in itself. The I does not make sense without the other shadowing it with the pure trace. Could be related to the debate on anthropomorphism and conservation? Perhaps yes. Perhaps by taking this linguistic post-structuralist idea as a metaphor, we could understand that what we call human is nothing purely separate from the animal. And thus, by reimagining ourselves as one inseparable with the endangered animal, this might perhaps lead to what conservationists call better affirmative empathy and effective action. Thank you. Thank you.
The next paper is by R.M. Chaudhary, Subversion of Conventional Identity, Domesticity of Tiger in Bengali Literature. Please introduce yourself.
Good afternoon, everyone. I am R.M. Chaudhary. Last year I have completed my master's degree from University of Kalyani. The title of my paper is Subversion of Conventional Identity, Domesticity of Tiger in Bengali Literature. Tiger is represented in literature as a symbol of strength, power, ferocity, and fear-evoking subject, just as the flyer of this seminar also talked about. In this respect, William Blake's The Tiger is most popularly cited poem. not only in English but also in Bengali literature, tigers are widely represented as wild and ferocious. For example, we can cite several names like Lawa Longer Bagh by Buddhadev Guho, Kalo Bagh by Monoranjan De, and many others. But there are several short stories in Bengali literature in which tigers are projected as cowardice, lazy, and domestic. This paper aims to discuss the subverted representation of this usual and conventional picture of tiger in Bengali literature. I will discuss three of such stories: Buker Opore Bagh by Sunil Gangopadhyay, Bagh Mari by Sanjeev Chattopadhyay, and Bidhu Daroga by Shishendu Mukhopadhyay. In these stories, tiger's ferocity is replaced by its cowardice behavior and domesticity. Identity in post-structuralist theorization is not fixed, but it is a spectrum. These stories open a scope of new possibilities. This paper will argue how identity is created through language, and by its repeated use it turns into a grand narrative and pervades other possibilities. As I have already mentioned above, that identity is created through language and its repetitive use, and by this repetitive use it becomes a grand narrative which actually conceals other possibilities. Tiger is always projected before us as wild and ferocious, and it has become a grand narrative. Whenever we hear the name of a tiger, we start assuming its ferocity and wildness as culture taught us. These short stories, which question the assumption of a tiger's by default ferocity, actually creates a space for new possibilities. These stories replace the masculine, obviously it is within code, masculinity of a tiger by its femininity. So tiger's identity is not only determined by its ferocity and power, but it leads to other meanings and possibilities, and thus it becomes more post-structuralist. In post-structuralist theorization, identity is not fixed, as I mentioned above, who decides that tiger will always be wild and ferocious. From this proposition, I would like to turn directly towards the stories. In Buker Opore Bagh by Sunil Gangopadhyay, there is a depiction of how a tiger is domesticated. There is no reason to think that a tiger can never be domesticated, and it is by default ferocious, wild, and therefore fear-evoking. Khoiri, the tiger, is the pet of Saroj Babu. Now I am quoting, there was a tiger lying in the adjacent garden. It is not tiny, but a big one, which cannot be seen even in the jungle. Translation mine, Gangopadhyay 22. Here comes the conflict of convention and subverting convention. It is not easy to take a tiger as a pet, as we are already conditioned with the idea of tiger's ferocity. They cannot be tamed. Language produced tiger as not to be tamed, but to be feared. As a result, the excursion group of Sunil Gangopadhyay in this story was never comfortable with a pet tiger within a house. Here, Saroj Babu can be considered as a symbol of post-structuralism, who tries to create a new meaning of the tiger, who wants to lead the writer and others towards a new possibility. Saroj Babu said, "Don't panic, it is my pet tiger." Translation mine, Gangopadhyay 23. But it was impossible for the group of Sunil Gangopadhyay, and they became hysterical with fear when the tiger placed its claws on my breast and its jaw is just before my face. Translation mine, Gangopadhyay 25. There is a clear description of a subverted identity of the tiger in the later part of the story. Khoiri roams here all the night. It barks if there is any door locked. We sleep with the doors opened. Mostly it can intrude the room and take the smell of our body. Their assumption is proved to be false when finally the tiger did not bite Nimai. Sunil Gangopadhyay and his friends could not spend the night there, although their assumption proved to be false. Naturalization of said patterns actually bars us to accept exceptions. In Sanjeev Chattopadhyay's Mazhari, tiger is projected as well-mannered, obedient and domestic one. We could see the obedience of the wild animals in circus shows, but it was gained by training and not by mannerism and domestication. We brothers, I'm quoting from the story, we brothers roamed in the garden on the back of that tiger. Translation Minds, Chattopadhyay 61. Or, the tiger was like English people, gentleman with manners and etiquettes. It slept near our feet in the bed at night. It brushed its teeth with a toothbrush in the morning. Translation Mind, Chattopadhyay 61. This subversion, this strangeness of behavior actually problematizes the assumption of the fear-evoking role of a tiger. At the ending of the story, the treatment of Champa for the tiger as her beloved son and the tiger's obedience to Champa surprises the readers and opens a new gateway of imagination for the readers. At the very ending of the story, we can perceive that the tiger, a wild animal, is allowed to stay in the room, and the four boys who are friends are asked to leave the room and stay in the forest for the night. Perhaps this is nature itself, a space of subverted possibilities and exceptions. Another amazing story which depicts tiger as coward, shy and lazy is Birhu Daroka by Shirshendu Mukhopadhyay. Here we can experience some crazy descriptions of the tiger. The tiger is chased by Harumandal's cow. It fears instead of attacking the cow. The cow and the tiger drinks water side by side from the same pond. Mukhopadhyay 51 to 52. There are other strange descriptions of the tiger. Strange descriptions.
That was sort of warning, we have got 2 more minutes.
The tiger is a very shy one as well as very lazy. The tiger and the cow live in the same cow house where the cow dominates over the tiger. The tiger becomes a mere plaything to the cow. This is how this story too subverts the usual role of the animals. The tiger becomes feminine and the cow masculine one. We cannot think a tiger is coward, shy or lazy, but it always represents power, ferocity and wildness. This subversion of identity of the tiger creates a peculiar space for new and unknown diversity. This proves that identity is not merely a fixed and concrete box, but it is fluid. If we think that tiger is the signifier, then in post-structuralist theorization, the signifier is not only limited to a 4-legged, wild, ferocious, powerful animal, but it leads to multiple other signifiers. That means tiger may signify anything. Its meaning is not limited and general, but individual. The stories question convention and even the name of the book, from which I selected those stories, 25 Bhayankar Bagh, 25 Dangerous Tigers, edited by Buddhadev Guho, published by Parul Prakashani. Tigers in these stories are not dangerous, but lovable. They misfit into the category of dangerous and makes themselves ambiguous self. Here I must confess that in this paper I am not concerned with the zoological reality, but with representation and its language. How far a tiger in reality can be shy or obedient to man or coward is another project of research work, but within language, tiger self is not constant, but it is fluid and opens new space for imagination, and how language creates identity was my concern. Thank you.
So now I invite Anvesha Ghosh. Bagh Mama falls on feet. Representation of tigers in Upendra Kishore Rai Chaudhary's Tuntunir Board.
Good afternoon. I am Anvesha Ghosh, final year postgraduate student at Presidency University, Kolkata. The title of my paper is Bagmama Falls on Feet, Representation of Tigers in Upendra Kishore Raichaudhuri's Tuntunir Boi vis-a-vis the reality. Judhajit Dasgupta writes, it is a wonder that tigers are still alive in India. Hirok Nandi writes, the tiger did not know how inhuman humans could be. As per Nolini Dash, a regular columnist of the New Sandesh magazine, the criteria of good children's literature are that there should not be scenes of death or any criminal acts in children's book. However, some of the tiger stories in Upendra Kishore Raichaudhuri's Tuntunir Boi contradict Dash's criteria not once but several times through the graphic representation of the violent killing of or brutal torture on tigers. In its attempt to assess the representation of tigers in select few stories of Raichaudhuri's Tuntunir Boi, this paper firstly interrogates how far these stories could be considered as children's literature. It could be argued that Raichaudhuri's tiger is not only a fool but also a victim. All other creatures not only outwit the tiger but also inflict brutal physical torture upon him. Such is the violence meted out to the tiger that it uncannily resembles a number of infamous tiger killing incidents of our country in the recent past. Secondly, this essay attempts to establish a link between Raichaudhuri's fiction and the recent reality. Under all its playful airs, some tiger stories in Tuntunir Boi reveal a threatening bedrock of hostility between tigers and humans. Sometimes Raichaudhuri's tigers are attacked without any concrete reason at all. Something similar happened in the Lalgor forest of West Bengal in April 2018, where an adult tiger was beaten to death using spears by the locals. How is one supposed to look at such barbaric acts of killing tigers? Is it just because of the fear of being devoured by the tiger? Or is it because humans get a sort of sadistic pleasure at being able to conquer a wild animal? In the era of Avni and her likes, Raichaudhuri's tiger stories become uncannily proleptic in the sense that one repeatedly sees a similar reaction of disharmony between humans and tiger. This paper concludes that ultimately the big cat is solitary, both in Raichaudhuri's fiction as well as in reality. Upendra Kishore Raichaudhuri becomes a distinctive figure in the scenario of children's literature in Bengal because it has been argued that he was the one, and I am quoting Supriya Goswami here, he was the one who shifted the focus of Bengali children's literature by not just transcribing the folklore but also using it as a creative source to write substantial number of original Bengali stories for children. Dakshinarajan Mitra Majumdar's Thakumar Jhuli was all about transcribing traditional oral narratives in the form of folk tales without adding anything new. On the other hand, Abanindranath Thakur's Hirer Putul was all about writing an original folk tale without borrowing anything from the traditional oral narratives. Upendra Kishore Raichaudhuri takes an interesting position because he not only borrows from the traditional sources but also infuses them with his own originality. The tigers in Tuntunir Boi are humanized just as the humans are bestialized. For example, the tiger in Chorayar Bagher Katha, the story of the sparrow and the tiger, craves for a seasonal Bengali delicacy, the pithe. The tiger in Bagbor dreams of marriage. The tiger in Buddhur Bab is curious about learning the new ways of humans. The tiger's remarriage in Bagher Radhuni is a marriage of compromise and not of love. The tigers in Tuntunir Boi feel like humans, desire like humans, think like humans. Such humanized portraits of tigers might seem to bring the animal world closer to the human world, but that is not the actual case. This is because the humanization of tigers happens simultaneously with the bestialization of humans. In Tuntunir Boi, it is no longer the tiger that leaps to attack its prey, but the humans who do not lose a moment to attack the tiger. Raichaudhuri's Tuntunir Boi therefore introduces the readers to a rural space which is fundamentally defined by man-animal conflict. One of the most significant ways by which Raichaudhuri's Tuntunir Boi can be differentiated from its predecessors like Thakumar Jhuli, according to Brototi Chakraborty, is by the absence of man-eating monsters, I am quoting her, and adventurous boys braving untold dangers. Raichaudhuri was determined to purge the children's literature of all its bloodthirsty elements, so much so that he used to read out the stories to his children for their approval and then edit them as per their instructions. In spite of all the measures taken, violence somehow manages to creep into some of the tiger stories in Tuntunir Boi in a terribly graphic form. In Bagher Radhuni, The Coop of the Tiger, my translation, the tiger protagonist decides to remarry after his tigress wife's death so that his cubs get someone to look after them. He marries a human girl this time because he believes that human beings have far better culinary skills than tigresses. Saddened because of the separation from her parents and worried by the constant death threats given to her by the cubs, The poor girl's grief knows no bounds. Finally, her brother comes to her rescue. Brother and sister together slaughter the two cubs and run away from the tiger's den. The girl is reunited with her family and they live happily ever after. This seemingly simple folk tale about the triumph of good over evil is built upon a terrifying substratum of violence. Good emerges victorious over the evil, but at the cost of a brutal bloodshed. The explicit description of the butchering of the cubs is worth noting, and I am quoting from Upendra Kishore. After the tiger left, the girl brought out her brother from underneath the grindstone. After finishing their supper, the siblings lighted the oven and put a cooking pot full of oil on it. And then they butchered the two cubs of the tiger, hung them above the oven and ran away from the place. The slaughtered cubs of the tiger were hanging above the oven and blood splashed in hot oil, drip, drip. My translation. The lines flow smoothly without any sense of tension because the brother-sister duo are in no hurry to kill the cubs. They first finish their food and then proceed with the killing. It would not be an exaggeration to say that the siblings are portrayed as two cold-blooded murderers who have everything planned out meticulously beforehand and are executing their plot without any rush. Finally, the terrifying description of the blood dripping from the mutilated bodies of the cubs is sure to send chill down any child's spine. Meenakshi Karmakar asserts that it might seem that the innocent minds of the children are affected by the gruesome slaughter of the two cubs, but the juvenile readers, she feels, are wise enough to understand that firstly, the tiger and the cubs are given their due punishment for victimizing the young girl. And secondly, when a victim stands up for herself, she strikes back violently without caring much about right or wrong. Therefore, Karmakar feels the explicit brutal violence in the story does not traumatize the children readers. Now, the question arises as to why the siblings take it upon themselves to punish the tiger and his cubs. The killing of the cubs could be considered more of a deviated way of punishing the tiger than just standing up for oneself. The slaughter of the cubs ensures that the tiger is left in such a terrible mental condition that he will never be able to attack any human ever. One wonders whether there really was no other way of punishing the tiger apart from killing his cubs. Baghe Radhuni is probably the only story where the tiger could be considered as the villain. But through the act of the slaughter, the siblings have also proven that they too are no less in villainy than the tiger. The story Dushtu Bagh, the naughty tiger, my translation, could be read as a contrast to Baghe Radhuni. A clever tiger persuades a Brahmin to unlock the door of his cage. Once the door is unlocked, the tiger wants to devour the Brahmin. However, he agrees to the Brahmin's proposal of visiting 3 witnesses to ask them whether people tend to harm the ones who do them good. The fact that the tiger actually accompanies the Brahmin to visit the witnesses to listen to their opinion instead of just eating him up is in itself a virtual enactment of legal procedures, thereby making Raichaudhuri's rural Bengal a virtual courtroom. The siblings in Baghe Radhuni, however, do not bother about participating in any virtual legal discourse. They directly take matters in their own hands, whereby they decide to kill the tiger cubs brutally. It seems that even a tiger has better understanding of law and justice than humans in the universe of Tuntuni Boi. The motive of the evil stepmother in Thakumar Jhuli has been commented upon by critics like Chandok Sengupta and Nolini Das. As stated by Chandok Sengupta, Upendra Kishore was not simply trying to recover and disseminate indigenous traditions, but to redefine the past for modern children. The traditional fairy tales of Bengal and their often bloody shenanigans were acceptable up to a point, but man-eating ogres, ghosts and spirits, brutal stepmothers and all such staples had to be eliminated. But to what extent Raichaudhuri was successful in removing the unhealthy contents from Bengali children's literature remains a big question, because it can also be argued that in Baghe Radhuni, Raichaudhuri reframes the motive of the evil stepmother propagated by Thakumar Jhuli. In Thakumar Jhuli, the stepmother tends to torture the stepchild without any fault of its own, usually out of jealousy. In Baghe Radhuni too, the stepmother tortures her stepchildren, in this case the cubs, but not without any reason. She kills them because they pose a constant threat to her survival. In other words, Raichaudhuri's narrative provides a justification for the torturous behavior of the stepmother. That is to say, the stepmother in this story is not inherently evil, but if harmed in any way, she can turn equally violent like her counterparts in Thakumar Jhuli. Among all the recent tiger killing incidents, this paper would like to focus on 2 particular cases. The April 2018 incident of the killing of a Royal Bengal tiger in Lalgarh forest and the November 2000 incident of the killing of a tigress in Uttar Pradesh. Both the cases are similar because both the tigers are killed in the most barbaric manner possible. In case of the former incident, the tiger was killed by the tribals as part of their annual hunting festival with spears and arrows. One of the arrows of a hunter hit the tiger in his right eye. As the tiger writhed in pain, the hunters attacked him with multiple arrows and spears, one after the other. What is remarkable is that the hunters kept on spearing the animal long after it had died. In case of the second incident, the tiger was beaten to death using sticks and then run over by a tractor as a punishment for preying on domestic animals and fatally injuring an elderly man. Hirok Nandi asserts that all these recent tiger killing episodes should not come as a surprise because harmonious coexistence between the animal world and the human world is too much to expect from humans who are unable to live harmoniously among themselves. No matter how humanized Raichaudhuri's animals are, it seems that the hierarchy between the animal world and the human world can never be blurred. Humans reign supreme in both Raichaudhuri's fiction and in our reality because the original motive perhaps was never to have a harmonious coexistence between humans and animals, but to assert man's superiority and dominance over the animals. In trying to link the violence in some of the tiger stories in Tuntunir Boi to today's reality, this paper has argued how today's reality is a mere extension of Raichaudhuri's universe, where circumstances never seem to be in favor of the weak. Thank you.
So we have Amit Provostu and Bishop Chatterjee, Tiger, Tiger Burning Bright.
Good afternoon. Our paper is entitled Tiger, Tiger Burning Bright. Tiger as the symbol of the weakening of feudal patriarchy in the works of Satyajit Ray. We are Rishabh Chatterjee and Auritra Basu, students of Jadavpur University Department of English, Master Degree, second year. The paper is divided into two parts. One, which analyzes the fall of the figure of the feudal lord in the three texts that we are analyzing closely, and another which posits the notion of the castration complex in the main figures in these narratives, which are Royal Bengal Rahosya, Chinnamosta Rohisha, and Hirok Rajadeshe. We will first talk about castration complex and the signifiers in these three texts which indicate at this symbolic incident from a Freudian perspective. In Hirok Rajadeshe, the symbolic castration occurs quite literally at the dead end of the film when Udayan Pandit and his students, along with the brainwashed Hirok Raja, brings down the phallic symbol of the statue. It is to be noted in this context that the phallus or the phallic symbol is not to be confused with the penis, because the penis is a biological organ while the phallus is a symbol, just like the statue of Hirok Raja is. There is a hidden message of communism in the narrative as well, insofar as Gopi and Bagha attempt a redistribution of available wealth by bribing the gods with diamonds upon being advised to do so by the Pandit. The role of the tiger as being dosed with medicine becomes significant in this context. If we take into consideration the fact that it was the to-be castrated Hirok Raja who dosed the tiger. He keeps the tiger hidden, but it is meant to protect his treasured diamonds from looters, which is what it precisely fails to do. This is the beginning moment of the symbolic castration of the autocrat, because that is when his empire starts falling apart. The point laid out by Chandra Das at the very first half of the movie is that the evil sits on the throne while the laborer does not get 2 square meals a day starts to be altered as the guards for the diamond mines are given diamonds as bribes, and there is a general awareness among the subjects. The slogan at the end, which translates to "pull down the string, overthrow the king," comes equally loud from the subjects as from the king himself, which goes on to show that castration as a symbolic phenomenon involves the active participation of the one being castrated. There was an attempt at a partial castration before when a rebellious student aimed a pebble at the nose of the statue. That moment, in one way, was the very first signifier of castration in the narrative of Hirok Raja. In the interpretation of dreams, Sigmund Freud points out in a footnote added in 1914, and I quote, "A tooth being pulled out by someone else in a dream is as a rule to be interpreted as castration," unquote. The protagonist, a faux tiger hunter and writer Mohito Shingora in Royal Bengal Rahosya, accidentally injures his arm while jumping off a tree to watch the arrival of a tiger, and it was the arrival of a tiger at the end of the narrative that exposed his injury. Thus, in this text, castration complex is intricately linked to the tiger, mostly because of a large part of the narrative revolves around the man-eater and the landlord Mohitosh, who were supposed to complement each other, but were both compromised in the end. The text shows us how the character Mohitosh tries his best to hide his castration complex among other things. Even when he sees his weakness being exposed, he still orders Feluda to leave the place so that the latter does not get a visible confirmation of what he had already deduced using his deduction skills. However, we later come to know that the reason he does not hunt in the jungles of his own territory is the fact that he wants to hide the facade of lies that he has built up with the help of his friend Shashanko and his secretary Torid, and he wants to maintain it till the end of the line. Mohitosh at the beginning of the narrative even denies the existence of the man-eater, knowing fully well that the presence of a tiger would require him to perform the role of a veteran hunter, which he would be incapable of doing. His worldview is shattered to pieces when Feluda explains how the treasure of the Sringorai family went missing from the place where it was actually hidden by Aditya Narayan, and in the process Feluda also exposes the facade of Mohitosh. Another important trope in this narrative is that of the pen, which shakes at the hand of Mohitosh Sringorai. The fact is pointed out by Feluda at the beginning of the story. The pen, like the arm or the rifle, is yet another phallic symbol, and the castrated Mohitosh fails to use it to perfection. Feluda gives him the benefit of doubt at the beginning, thinking that he has aged recently or has suffered an injury after the government banned the hunting of tiger. However, it does not take him long to figure out that his incompetence, which he is desperate to hide, has resulted from an incident in childhood. He pays his secretary a hefty amount of money, which is way more than his deserved salary, to ensure that he keeps his mouth shut about the fact that Mohitosh cannot use the pen. His friend Shashanko, who hunts down tigers and other animals on his behalf in the jungles of Odisha and Assam, does so out of a sense of sympathy. The relation to Mohitosh's descent is very important in this context, as he confessed to Feluda later in the novel that he wanted to uphold the image of the hunter which ran in the family from the time of his grandfather. The signifier of castration appears in a veiled manner in the novel Chinno Mostaravisham, but unlike the other two texts, there is no visual tearing down or malfunctioning of the phallic symbol, but there is the excess of it. As Freud has pointed out, quote, dreams very often represent castration by the presence of two penis symbols as the defined expression of an antithetical wish, unquote. The excess of the phallic symbol in the likes of the rifle of Arun Bandopadhyay and the rifle of the forest department officials accounts for the presence of castration complex in this narrative. However, the inherent weakness envisaged by the castrated subject, along with a moment of experiencing inferiority from the fear of castration, really happens on the second trainer of the tiger Chandran when he is injured by the escaped tiger in an attempt to recapture the latter. What is an interesting fact in this context is that it does not happen directly in the text but is mentioned in passing. Thus, the very signifier of castration and its execution is kept veiled from his readers. The castrated Chandran becomes afraid of the tiger from this point on, as Ray himself points out at one point in the narrative through the voice of Topshe, that Chandran could not forget the fact that he was injured by this very tiger. The figure of Karandikar, who later turns out to be the second son of Mahesh Chaudhary, is the one who is able to control the tiger, and it is he who facilitates its recapture at the end of the plot. It is to be noted in this context that another signifier of castration, and a pretty evident one at that, appears at the moment of the capture of the tiger. Feluda jumps next to Arun Babu and silently lowers his rifle. Topshe points out that Feluda did this because he saw the arrival of Karandikar before everyone else. Thus, the demasculization of Chandran and to an extent of Karandikar happens at the sign of another and to an extent of Thus, the demasculization of Chandran happens at the site of another person, the real trainer of the tiger, Karandikar. One might remember the detail from the first half of the story where Karandikar opened his shirt to reveal plenty of scratch marks all over his body. The question then arises that why would the same kind of injury indicate castration complex in one and not in the other? The answer lies in the fact that castration is not a physical phenomenon but a symbolic gesture, often without a physical manifestation. I would now hand over the rest of the paper to Rishabh Chatterjee, who will talk about the other half of the paper.
In the following decades after independence, the country has seen the gigantic rise of the Communist Party of India, Marxist, that based the leftist movement on the fundamental demand for land reformation, without which putting an end to feudal exploitation was impossible. Coming into power, the Left Democratic Front in Kerala and the Communist Party of India, Marxist in Bengal, passed the Land Reform Act in 1969 and in 1977, respectively, which materialized the abolishment of inheritance of limitless ancestral land by the then feudal lords. Interestingly, Royal Bengal Rashtra got published in 1974, while Chinno Mostaravisham was published in 1977, both following and during the enactment of these two land reforms. This point in the historical narrative of Bengal will serve as the foundation of our analysis. The fact that Mohitosh belongs to both upper class and upper caste are significant and are to be analyzed with respect to each other. The motive of the tiger plays twofold roles in the symbolic framework of the two novels, which are posited opposite to each other but are functionally similar. On the one side, the feudal bourgeoisie or the social elite, the other is the proletariat. But both symbolizes weakening and disempowerment. In its biocultural identity, it is the forestial, thus its subject position is allied with the working class and against the feudal oppressor whom he subverts in Royal Bengal Roadshow. On the other hand, the caged tiger of Chinnamasta Robisha and the wounded tiger of Royal Bengal Roadshow reflect the feudal bourgeoisie or the social elite who are trapped in the post-independent Indian society that materializes land deformation. In Chinnamasta Robisha, the aggressive vengeful tiger of Royal Bengal Roadshow has degraded into a tameable one, submissive enough to surrender itself to human entertainment. It's interesting how possession of space becomes a signifier of power or disempowerment in both the tiger and the feudal bourgeoisie. There are plenty of references in the text to prove that the two wealthy families, the Sahais and the Chaudhuris, were not zamindars but rather social elites who, buying lands and building up mansions in Hazaribagh, being a blatant example of that. The intriguing part is precisely this, that two upper-class rich men buying lands, building their mansions in the outskirts and not in the city. The attachment and pride in Mohesh about the land and property he possesses is reflected when he announces, "No sir, amar plan kora anekot, no sir, amar plan kora badi, ami dekhabo," unquote. Interestingly, the tiger was finally caught, his liberty of possessing space was curtailed and he was made servile again. There is more to hunting than a traditional display of masculinity. It actually is a marker of upper caste, Khotchur to be specific, a sign of elite blood. Mohitosh himself clarifies this while unwittingly exposing his own hypocrisy, and I quote, "শিকারটাকে স্পোর্টসের মধ্যে ধরা হতো কিনা আজকে নয় আদিকাল থেকে। পৌরাণিক যুগে রাজারা মৃগ হয়ে যেতেন, মোগল বাদশারাও যেতেন। ইদানিংকালে আমাদের 200 বছরের প্রভু সাহেবেরও যেতেন আর আমরাও গেছি।" Unquote. Same applies in case of taxidermy, which is too recurrent in Chinnamasta Robisha and Royal Bengal Roadshow, both to ignore it as mere elite interior designing. In Royal Bengal Roadshow, we find a trophy room which is, and I quote, "বাঘ ভাল্লুক বাইসন হুইল কুমিরের চামড়া আর মাথায় ভরা একটা বিশাল ঘর," unquote. In Chinnamasta Robisha, Mohesh's oldest son, Orunendra, is an ex-hunter, and we find, and I quote, "এবারে লক্ষ্য করলাম ঘরের ঠিক মাঝখানে একটি চিতাবাঘের ছালের উপরে বসে একটি বছর পাঁচেকের মেয়ে," unquote. Hunting thus contributes to the growth of false consciousness in these class-based groups. But does this marker of upper-class elitism find itself at its previous keys in the changing social framework of the post-independent country? Along with the Land Reform Act of 1977, another very significant act got passed in India in the same decade that created similarly severe impact upon the zamindari bourgeoisie class. The Wildlife Preservation Act of 1972, legally banning all sorts of killing of any wildlife, disempowered the feudal bourgeoisie tremendously. From a Gramscian perspective, when the land reforms did to the feudal system's base, the Wildlife Preservation Act did exactly that to its superstructure. It took away the edge of the bourgeoisie to prove their mettle by an act of violence upon the weak, and that is why they had to shift to other modes of domination. The sword of Aitanaran plays a pivotal thematic role in the symbolic framework of the narrative. It's a symbol of the feudal glory of the Shingorai clan. There are three implications of this symbol. Number one, the fact that Aitanaran died at the hands of the tiger while trying to kill it with this sword is a hint that the masculine heroism is fading, decaying. The sword signs that it cannot kill. It is placed in the trophy room as a memento of the zamindari hunting prowess, but in reality it lacks any effectivity. It fails Aitanaran, it directly fails Tadi. The proud hunter of 150 tigers, that is Aitanaran, in his least, finally dies at the hand of the forestier. Secondly, the sword of 19th century literally means the glory that is long dead. The failure of the sword when Tadit uses it proves this point even more. The sword, like the feudal man, may have some effectivity, some differentiality 150 years back, but in the present post-independent socio-political scenario, the feudal man has lost all its efficacy like the sword. He is completely out of time and out of place. He lacks any context, any referential framework to exist within. Finally, Tadit's plan of retrieving the wealth informs us about his desire of becoming the overnight social elite. As he dreams of becoming an elite, fantasizes being Mohitosh himself, it is clear that he wants to climb up the ladder of economic class. He therefore attempts a kind of revival, a rebirth of feudal system. The excavation of the feudal property of silver currency, taking it out from the grave, all this symbolizes Tadit's aim of recovering the decaying feudal prowess, and therefore he imitates the feudal elite by using his sword. And like the elite himself, the sword fails Tadit too. In Chinnamasta Rovishat, the sword is replaced. Just 1 minute. In Chinnamasta Rovishat, the sword is replaced by the skin of the cheetah, though they symbolically mean the same dead masculine and feudal glory. The feudal system has lost all the economic efficacy, social relevance, and gradually withering. And the social relevance is gradually withering, and yet the stuffed tiger shows the vacuity of desperate lingering onto the past pride that's long dead. The heroism of hunting has deteriorated into mere home decor for the stuffed men, for the hollow men. In their first meeting, Mohitosh points out to Feluda, and I quote, "Ekale মানুষের সঙ্গে যুদ্ধ করেছি, তারপর মানুষ ছেড়ে জানোয়ার ধরেছি." The word war actually is used to both mean and conceal oppression. This class and caste oppression generates from the same root as do their practice of hunting. In the last 3 generations, his clan has extended similar oppression as the class and caste-based ones over the wildlife. In case of Mohitosh, his twofold oppressions are complementary to one another. Ironically, his feudal glory of taming the wild comes from the exploitation of the working class, one who kills the tiger for him and the other who celebrates it publicly, true, entwining that in a narrative. In the climax, the forestier attacks the helpless, incapable feudal, and it's Shashanko, the working class man, who saves him. It's not only the coming out of reality that demolishes feudalism, but also the way in which the proceedings take place. The working class could not join in the forestier revenge, but why so? It's because of the deep-seated false consciousness in the working class man that continues the legitimization of oppression in the name of friendship. Let's leave it there. Thank you.
Now I invite Shuja Sengupta. He who kills the tiger, tiger hunting, masculinity and the Oedipal fantasy of the Bengali Babu.
Good afternoon everyone, I am Shuja Sengupta from Rishi Bankim Chandra College, Noihati. Today my topic for discussion is He Who Kills the Tiger, Tiger Hunting, Masculinity and the Oedipal Fantasy of the Bengali Babu. The image of tiger has been associated with courage, virility, strength, aggression, brutality, ferocity, namely all masculine qualities since time immemorial, be it in the form of the colloquial Badher Bacha or the historical Tipu's tiger. Consequently, hunting a ferocious beast has always been permeated with numerous potent meanings rather than serving merely as a means of entertainment. As Anand Pandyan notes in Predatory Care, Emperor Akbar pursued much more than worldly pleasure on his hunting expeditions. He utilized hunting expeditions as a way of increasing his knowledge and besides used hunting parties as occasions to inquire without first having given notice of his coming into the condition of the people and the army. The British imperial rulers, on the other hand, sought to establish the idea of British masculinity by dint of the practice of tiger hunting. Hunting as a royal entertainment came to prominence in India from the time of the Mughal emperors. Most of the Mughal sovereigns were prodigious hunters. Their memoirs were replete with stories of the chase. Lions and tigers, elephants, deer, antelope, buffalo, waterfowl, and many other kinds of birds and animals were subject to imperial predation. One of the greatest adversaries that the British imperialists had to face was Mysore's Tipu Sultan, who employed tigers as powerful symbols of their rule. This is a tiger-head finial from Tipu's throne. The tiger stripe was used as decoration on his throne, on the uniforms of his soldiers, and on his coins, flags, and arms. The most famous was Tipu's tiger, a mechanical man-eating tiger cum organ designed by French craftsmen for him around 1794, which, when wound, enacts an allegory of the fierce animosity Tipu's regime felt towards their British adversaries, representing the macabre scene of a tiger roaring and pouncing on a prostrate, shrieking European victim. In their aspiration to become the new Mughals, the British first had to defeat rulers like Tipu Sultan. In hunting tigers during the 19th century then, the British drew upon two powerful meanings, both associated with Indian kingship. On the one hand, they consciously sought to emulate the Mughals and other Indian rulers by killing tigers. On the other, in the course of destroying these animals, they were also symbolically staging the defeat of Tipu Sultan and other Indian rulers who dared to get in the way of Britain's imperial conquest of India. The British imperialists introduced the lion as antithetical imagery of Tipu's tiger, which is manifested in the commemorative medal issued by the East India Company to mark the 1799 defeat of Tipu Sultan. The medal depicts a scene in which a lion is seen pouncing upon an affrighted tiger. As Julie Hughes informs us, and I quote, "The tiger stood as a totemic representation of the savagery and uncivilized exoticism of the East, destined to defeat when faced with the superior nature and morality of the lion and the West." Despite their affinity for tiger hunting, it is interesting to note that not all field sports enjoyed by the Indian rulers were equally popular among the Britons. Hawking, coursing with greyhounds or cheetahs failed to garner as much appreciation in spite of the exertion offered. In fact, in the early 19th century, due to the primitive weaponry and methods used, tiger hunting was considered to be quite dangerous. Perhaps it is precisely because of the risk involved it was the most celebrated of all, as it paved way for the establishment of colonial masculinity. As Joseph Suffolk affirms, I quote, "The greatest attraction of the sport for many of these hunters was its association with masculinity. Hunting was the sole prerogative of the male members of the society in the Mughal period, and in the British colonial era, mention of women hunters, albeit rare, was not completely unheard of. But, as Mary Procida gives the account of an anecdote where two excellent hunters were married to each other, the wife, in order to avoid contentious competition in their marriage, decided that she would shoot only immobile targets while her husband would handle moving prey. An essentialist approach to gender would relate this anecdote with masculine activity and feminine passivity, which was in fact appropriated by people like Army Captain Thomas Williamson, who regarded tiger hunting as a manly diversion requiring coolness and a good aim. Tiger hunting assumed ritualistic proportions, as Army Captain Henry Shakespeare argued that partaking in big game hunting would keep young men, I quote, "out of 1,000 temptations and injurious pursuits." He argued that hunting was an innocent, manly and useful activity that would not only keep them fit for their duty as soldiers, but would also prevent them from taking to the gaming table or to an excess of feasting, rioting, debauchery and other frivolous pursuits or effeminate pleasures. In the initial years, especially during the Company rule, the British hunted with the indigenous ruling classes, often emulating their methods and techniques. In the second half of the 19th century, British attitudes toward indigenous hunting changed dramatically. Joseph Samek argues that after the 1870s, three crucial changes took place that separated colonial hunting from that of the Indian practices. The development of new technology, that is firearms, introduced a different dimension to big game hunting. The Forest Act of 1878 made the forest inaccessible to the indigenous population, and the third important factor was the pomp that came to be associated with the Raj. At the turn of the 18th century, when hunting started being considered a sport, ideas pertaining to fairness in hunting practices became popular among the English upper classes. The hunting practices that had been common among upper classes in England during the 18th century, such as battue, the practice of driving game to the shooters using beaters, came to be seen by some as unfair and not the type of behavior that real sportsmen would engage in. Shafqat Hussain also points out that it was during this period the British sportsmen, especially those hunting tigers, started to view the hunting methods of the local princes and rajas with disdain because they lacked the sporting element so crucial to their new hunting experience. Britons derided the indigenous hunting methods as being inefficient, cowardly, or needlessly dangerous to themselves or others. William Rice also dispraised the methods used by the Indian princes because of the supposed needless danger they put themselves into. Rice argued it was more often than not the rule instead of the exception that at least one or more Indians would be killed during each grand hunting party. He further criticized the cavalry attitudes of many of these princes who explained away the deaths of their Indian helpers by calling them accidents. Interestingly enough though, he conveniently disregarded the similar attitudes of the Britons who were arguably more cavalier. This accentuation of the Indian rulers' inadequacy to protect their subjects also served to justify the ostensible white man's burden and emphasize the colonized subjects' imperative need for British imperialism. As you can see in this picture, the British man is aiming at the tiger with a gun and the native is running away. In the next picture as well, As you see, two Englishmen are shooting the tiger while the native is running away. These notions of total Indian helplessness are necessary for the British to establish their hegemonically masculine ideals. Scholars like Ashish Nandi and Mrinalini Sinha have repeatedly pointed out that the British colonial discourse was replete with images of Hindus, especially Bengalis, as being weak and ineffectual, who were devoid of any form of masculinity. In his essay on Warren Hastings, Thomas Babington Macaulay described the Bengalis as being feeble, servile and effeminate. Here you can see the whole quote. In the 1820s, Bishop Heber noted that Bengalis were regarded as the greatest cowards in India, and that the term Bengali was used to express anything which was roguish and cowardly. Adhering to George L. Moses' ideas in The Image of Man, it can be argued that the British masculine stereotype was strengthened by the existence of a negative stereotype of men who not only failed to measure up to the ideal, but who in body and soul were its foil, projecting the exact opposite of true masculinity. In order to oppose these racist rhetoric, post-secular military Bengal saw a tremendous upsurge of nationalist sentiments in the form of movements aimed at social and cultural reform. In 1867, Hindu Mela was introduced to motivate Bengali youths to pursue physical development. Rather than rejecting the hegemonically masculine ideas put forward by the British, the Bengalis, in acquiescence with those racist rhetoric, sought to emulate the same. Their affinity towards the British masculine ideals found expression in their naming of their national heroes. Sir Ashutosh Mukherjee was often called Banglar Bagh, or the Tiger of Bengal, for his courage, high self-esteem and intransigent attitude towards the British government. Jyotirlal Mukherjee, who fought single-handedly against the Royal Bengal tiger for 3 hours and killed it with a dagger, earned the sobriquet of Bagha Jyoti. Use of such animalistic epithets, especially that of the tiger, was hitherto unprecedented in Bengal's cultural history, and this hints at the Bengalis' endeavour to identify with the hegemonically masculine ideals perpetrated by the British in the colonial era. These instances evince that Bengalis too have started associating tiger hunting with several potent images. Joseph Smith points out that British tiger hunting represented imperial domination not just of India's politics but also of its natural environment. Safkat Hussain also asserts that metaphors of hunting were also used by British sportsmen in colonial India to signify at once a symbolic conquest of the physical geography of India and attainment of a political and moral destiny. Keeping these arguments in view, it can be hypothesized that the Bengalis' attempt at identifying with the masculine ruling class was an attempt to gain control over the natural environment as well. Considering the agrarian past of Bengal, it can be argued that hitherto the relationship maintained between the nature and the inhabitants of Bengal was that of a mother-son relationship, as nature is conventionally regarded as feminine. The British imperialists were known to exploit the natural resources of Bengal as they maintained a master-slave relationship with the natural environment. The Bengalis' attempt at identifying with the colonizers, therefore, can be hypothesized to be an Oedipal fantasy where there is a desire to participate in the exploitation. Thank you.
Last paper in this session is by Subodh Mathur on beyond boundaries and presentation of different man and psychological life. And this is the earlier
My regards to the chair, the Department of English and the organizers. Hello everyone, I am Subodh Mathur.
Please, silence, please. Respect the
I am Subodh Mathur, a research scholar from Banaras Hindu University. The title of my paper is Born Beyond Boundaries and the representation of difference of man and tiger in Life of Pi. In the recently concluded Kolkata Literary Meet, the novelist, the writer of the novel Life of Pi, Ian Martin, talked about the roles of animals in his works. He said, I quote, "It inspired me to use the animal symbolizing the divine. In my earlier novels, animals were just minor characters, but during the writing of Life of Pi, I realized that animals can be really strong characters. We seem to confine animals to the world of children's literature, but to me their symbolic potential to me is infinite. They act as a rich vehicle for a storyteller." This paper, which focuses on the relationship between human beings and non-human animals, is based on his book-making novel, Life of Pi. It is a heartwarming tale of genuine relationship between Pi Patel and non-human animals, particularly with a Royal Bengal tiger named Richard Parker. Non-human animals have served an important role in the course of the novel, rather than just being the outcast in the human-centric or anthropocentric world. Nevertheless, the disappearing of Richard Parker in a jungle has raised some of the poignant questions which are highlighted in this paper. This novel starts on depicting about the zoo run by Pai's father Santosh Patel in Pondicherry. His father and all other members, including Pai, are very fond of zoo animals. According to Pai, I quote, "It was paradise on earth. I have nothing but the fondest memories of growing up in a zoo. I lived the life of a prince." Unquote. But at the same time, they also know that the most dangerous animal in the zoo is man, because it is our excessive greed that made the planet a prey, a victim of human being. In the title of the paper, the first two letters of the word human, HU, is kept in parentheses, because in the world or in the literature, the interest of man or mankind is always placed high above the living beings in the world. For that, human beings sometimes keep aside the word humanity from their deeds and behavior towards the other living beings. In the novel, the role of the author along with the role of the other men in representing and understanding animals is also significant. If we look at the earlier text about non-human animals, it can be easily found that they are only described in objective way, as if they are only meant to serve the human purpose. In Christianity also, the distinction is clear. I quote from Genesis, "And God said, let us make man in our image, after our likeness, and let them have dominion over the fish of the sea, and over the fowl of the air, and over the cattle." Unquote. But this is not the case with Life of Pi. Here, apparently Richard Parker and other animals are represented subjectively. Due to some political turmoil in India, Pai's father had no other option but to leave the country. He decides to move to North America, where no such complexities in keeping animals in zoo. When the sea is carrying all the animals to North America, it is overpowered by a storm and drowned in the Pacific. Pai's parents and brothers are also immersed into the ocean as well. But Pai survives anyhow on a lifeboat. To his utter shock and fear, he finds that there are other 4 lives in the same boat. There is spotted hyena, a zebra, and a orangutan, and also a Royal Bengal tiger. The novel helps to lead us out of our long story of human-centeredness and take us some distance along the road to the attachment of the grounding in the animal world, of which humans are a part, both human and non-human being to an animal world. Human animal possess a complex and more developed brain, which non-human animals do not. The novel portrays human animals as creatures both shaped by culture and part of the animal world. It presents an imaginative reconstruction of the place of human animals in the non-human animal world. Through the lifeboat symbol, the novel asserts the urgent need for reconciliation between humans and other animals in a world threatened by human dominance. The titular character Pai also depicts the affective level of Richard Parker, the tiger, and of relation between human and non-human animals for survival. It also suggests about the spiritual dimension to the engagement with the animal world. When Pai's mother says, "We are all alone," quote unquote, shortly before her death, Pai is deeply hurt by this statement. On allegorical level, the comment symbolizes the guilt of an anthropocentric civilization. Make it water. On allegorical level, the comment symbolizes the guilt of an anthropocentric civilization, the way out of the emotional, moral, and spiritual dead end of human self-centeredness. The way back to the animal world begins with the realization that he must save the tiger in order to survive himself. I quote, "It was not a question of him or me, but him and me. We were literally and figuratively in the same boat." Literally, Pai speaks of the extreme hope of his own survival through his relationship with the tiger, but symbolically the novel here evokes the survival of the human species through an interconnection with all living beings. Pai's conclusion that his only means of survival is to keep him alive means keeping the animals alive for the survival of human beings. This is perhaps the message for all contemporary humans as well. For the sake of ourselves, the animals, we must make the planet our zoo rather than a slaughterhouse. The mastery humans have acquired over non-human animals is represented by the mastery Pai achieves through training Richard Parker. his use of the Mazhari to foster a symbiotic relationship rather than a predatory one is praiseworthy, as he feels that he stays alive because he feeds the tiger. Similarly, the far stronger tiger refrains himself from pouncing the small human beings, partly because he constantly provides food and also because the tiger also seeks a friendly relationship to avoid in the hour of loneliness. Their friendly relationship offers benefits for both. Moreover, the benefits for buyer. Another important thing is that, like the earlier literary works like Black Beauty, The Call of the Wild, or The Bishop's Fable, the non-human characters are not anthropomorphized. They are not given the human traits like talking by the author. Throughout the novel, real character portrayal of non-human animals remind us about the non-human animals mentioned also in the Bengali short story like Mohesh and Mohesh written by Sharat Chandra Chattopadhyay and Kala Pahad by Tarashankar Bandyopadhyay. In these two stories, the love and emotion between human and non-human characters are only examples of human animal subjectivity. Neither they are symbolic nor are they allegorical. Now the disappearing of animals, or is it the intentional machination? In Life of Pi, when the boat carrying Pi and Richard Parker comes ashore on the beach of Mexico, within few minutes, Richard Parker disappears into the nearby jungle. The act is so, quote-unquote, unceremonious and really hard to believe that after spending the turbulent and eventful hours of 227 days together, how the tiger could leave Pi, his only friend, without taking a look. In his own words, he passed directly in front of me on his way to the right. He did not look at me. He ran 100 years and so along the shore before turning in. Unquote. When Pai is rescued and questioned by the two officials of Japanese ministry about his survival and fight against all the odds for more than 227 days, they just refuse to believe what they hear about the survival with a large Royal Bengal tiger. He has to tell them another false story to make them believe. And after the second story, when he asked which story they prefer and which is the better story, the story with animals or the story without animals, then they reply that, I quote, the story with animal is the better story. Now question may rise that is the disappearance of Richard Parker spontaneous by animal himself or is it the forced one from the writer? And another also important point may be that the animals are still an important part of wilderness, which is thought to be untainted by the human world. That's why the author maybe established the idea. One should not forget that also they make us human. I mean, the animals make us human in a continual process of reshaping. Just as we affect the evolution of both domesticated and wild species, if they are really irrelevant in humans' life, then the pet culture would not be flourished in nowadays. Or in this way of representation, do the authors try to gain the sympathy of readers of the animals, whatever may be the issues? Whatever may be the issues, animals should be acknowledged by the human beings rightfully as fellow companions, because they are not really unconscious automata as termed by René Descartes. They are emotionally and spiritually involved with the human protagonist, but the main problem is that by the end of this text, animals have to go out of the literary scene for certain reasons. Animals conjure the text to be a quote-unquote better story, but their important contributions are denied to human acceptance. In a way, the texts link our attributes to animals with the ways in which our earlier narratives have dealt with animals by relegating them into the background of human lives. Is this anthropocentric attitude of human beings as well as the author of the text acceptable in order to neglect or even reject the presence of non-human animals in human lives? With this question, I like to end my paper. Thank you.
Thank you. And now it's open for debate, discussion. If you have questions, please come forward, raise your hand and ask your question. We had many interesting papers and I'm sure you have questions to ask. Yes? No question?
Yes, thank you.
Then thanks to all the Baba.
Sir, question.
Oh, please.
This is for the first paper, Shruti Shmito. Now, my point is, when you talk about the, create this interesting binary between human and animal, how do you ensure that a human is a human, particularly in the age of artificial intelligence, when consciousness itself is a philosophical dilemma?
See, that was precisely the point of the paper. The human animal is binary. The binary is something that I did not create. That is how things have been defined. Man versus the woman, or human versus the animal, the West versus the East. The point is that you cannot define the human without the animal. You cannot define the natural without the artificial. So, talk about any static definition, human, or even, as you say, artificial intelligence. What is artificial intelligence without the human tracing it as the other? No definition is possible without some sort of an idea of the other.
Consider consciousness in itself. Consciousness qua consciousness. How is a tiger less conscious than a human?
I think the only way to find out how the tiger could be less conscious is to subject it to a thorough psychoanalysis. And
Consciousness cannot be assessed via psychoanalysis.
Yes, it could
If I
be.
was to see consciousness, maybe if I was to consider it to be supra-consciousness, lower forms of consciousness, how am I to, for instance, philosophically identify myself as something that is conscious versus, let us say, the speaker, which cannot be the speaker box, which cannot be subjected to any psychoanalysis?
Yeah, you cannot subject the speaker to psychoanalysis because the speaker is outside the realm of what you call the spoken being, the speaking being.
Consciousness. How is consciousness not there and in me? Am I conscious that that is conscious? Or is the speaker conscious, the speaker is conscious, I am not conscious?
See, if I could, I'd like to make an elaborate point.
We are running out of time. We have another session.
1.5 minutes, yes.
No, we will discuss this later on. I mean, very briefly, if you could.
Yes, please go ahead.
So, not a question.
Yes, somebody else has a question.
You want to come to my aid?
No, it's
That is.
all right. So it's a question combined with a comment, which is that I really like to hear. I think give you that first. And the binary that you was talking about, animal and the human. I was wondering why you didn't refer to this text by Derrida called the animal. Therefore, I am. In that text, he elaborates on the binary between the animal and the human and talks about the ethics of the non-human. And there he also talked about consciousness and so on and so forth. Okay, so you would have probably, because you were talking about your presence, your place from Derrida, that would have been one addition, theoretical observation. The other point is wondering, have you watched this film called Royal Bengal Tiger? Yeah. So there too, it's Abhi Chatterjee plays in two roles.
Oh yes.
So there, one human being
Forgotten the title.
suddenly he becomes a tiger-like figure.
Yeah.
From almost woman-like man, and definitely a Bengali man, becoming a masculine subject, very strong, very aggressive. So
Almost like Fight Club.
yeah. So the point is that this trace of the animal is always there in the human, in that particular character, and vice versa. So I was thinking that we could have added this. People were probably thinking about textual connect between these texts. These are the two comments I thought I should make.
To Sir about how our consciousnesses come to happen. You're probably talking about the concept of I, right? How I know that this is me. How am I conscious? All right.
Thank you, Suresh. But you just don't go. There might be other questions. Yes? Do we have questions? No?